What's up, internet? So today what I want to do is take you to the behind the scenes of a project I just finished up here. It's called It's Not What You Take, It's What You Bring Back. It's an installation full of luggage donated from people around Colorado, put together in this shape. And I want to sort of do a deep dive into this project and really do it in two videos. The first video right here is going to be about the behind the scenes of how I got the project and the application stuff. The second video is going to be about the fabrication, transportation, installation, all that other stuff. So if you're wanting to learn more about the behind the scenes of public art projects because you're interested, I think these two videos are going to be great for you. So let's get started with this first video. So first things first, how did I get a project like this? This project really came about in 2021 when I was basically trying to transition from a lot of the murals that I do, because people know me for the murals, into a lot of sculptural work, public art sort of pieces that are large and in your face. And to do that, you know, it's a catch-22, because if you don't have a project like that, it's hard to get on the short list. So I hired someone named Mary Valdez, who used to work for the city in the arts and venue department. So she had a lot of experience and I don't. So I wanted her to help me apply for these projects. Also because I don't want to have to spend my time typing everything and doing the admin stuff. I wanted to be, you know, actually creating the artwork. So she helped me apply for all these projects, and she helped link me up with a company called Demerge. So we're going to talk about them in a second. So, but the first thing first is applying for these projects. And where do you find projects like this? You can go to a website like Call for Entries. You can find listings of different projects and artist calls that the city or different organizations have. So with cities and municipalities, anything government wise, you're going to find these projects here, because they have to list a lot of those projects over a certain budget on these websites. So everything is super public. So this is where we found the artist calls for the Denver International Airport in 2021, and they had 4 different artist calls, and we applied for one of those because 3 of those were international calls. So those calls anyone around the world can apply for, so the competition is going to be heavy. So we applied for the one call that was basically limited to Colorado residents. So we applied for that call right there. And on this website Call for Entry, you can basically see the call and apply right on the website. They have a place for you to create an account and to build a portfolio. So when you apply, you can actually add those portfolio pieces to your application. But one thing for this project that I really wanted to do is sort of beef up the team. So Mary Valdez introduced me to a fabrication team called Demerge, and Joe Rice, who owns it, basically has a full service fabrication shop. So if you go to their shop, you're able to give them an idea, and basically they're able to create everything that you really want. So basically they're full service, so you can come there with a sketch on a notepad and they'll figure out how to actually build it. So because they're full service, they do everything from design, rendering, engineering, architecture, fabrication, you know, all the logistics and transportation, installation, maintenance, all that good stuff. Basically they're able to do everything so that I don't have to. They're expensive, of course, but I wanted to make sure that I had a team that also worked with the airport prior, so that when I have them on the application saying I'm going to use them, the airport is saying, oh, we worked with them before. So that's one of the reasons why I linked up with Demerge, the fabrication team, and added them to the actual application, because they had a lot of experience. I did not. Mary Valdez had some experience and I did not. So it's just building a team of people that you can add to that application to really beef up your experience in terms of, you know, I guess assurance that you can actually get the project done. And once we applied, it was about 2 or 3 months in between until we found out that I was on the short list. And what a short list is, from all those different applications, they whittle it down to 4 or 5 individuals or teams that they want to present a full proposal. And a full proposal is basically, what do you want to actually do? Because before, when we were applying, it was just an RFQ, or request for qualification. And that is basically, are you qualified? Building a team, we're qualified. Now that we're on the short list with 4 other artists, now it's basically, what is your idea? So we had about 2.5, 3 months to put together an idea. And I actually have a web page on a website that I'm building that kind of shows you some of the ideas that I was sort of going through in terms of how do I wow the selection committee. And for me, one of the first things I had to realize was, how do I communicate to a committee my idea? But first, how do I communicate that to the fabricators and sort of get them to see what I wanted to see? So you can kind of see right here the sketches that I was doing in 2D world on my iPad with the program Procreate. So in the top left, you can kind of see me sketching out some ideas, and then to the right, me flushing everything out. But it wasn't until I learned the program Blender. And Blender right here is a great program. It's free. Basically, I learned Blender through a tutorial that someone had on YouTube where you're building a donut and you're learning how to use that program by building that donut and, you know, molding it and modeling it and texturing it and giving it lighting and all this other stuff. But I used this program because it's free and it was easy to kind of, I would say easy to have access to in terms of the resources to learn. So I used this program, downloaded it, learned enough to kind of build up these different models that I thought would be great for showing what I wanted to do. So I showed these bottom models to Demerge and they were like, okay, I understand exactly what you're trying to get at. Now I'm able to understand, okay, how much is this going to cost? How do we engineer this? What do we do to put this thing together, have it suspended, all that good stuff. And then once we did a site visit with the airport, because when you're on the short list, you all get together, all the artists that are competing get together and do a site visit at the actual location, because we want to ask questions about the site. So this is me and all the different artists on the shortlist at the site looking at the different space. So this is Concourse B East at the Denver International Airport near Gate B60. Now they're doing a ton of renovations here, so a lot of this stuff will change since we got there at the beginning to when I installed. But this was the space that we looked at in terms of, okay, how much lighting is there? How big is it? How do people interact with that space? What are they going to build around it? All these different questions. So this is basically me on the moving body escalator, just basically trying to check it out in terms of what can I put there that's really cool. The site and figuring out exactly what's at the site and what we can do with it, what are the capabilities. That's when the airport gives us a bin model, and basically a bin model is sort of a CAD design or the inner workings of the airport, so that you know exactly what sort of steel beams you can suspend from, or where some of the wiring may be, or where some of the sort of infrastructure or structure of the airport is, so that you know exactly what you can and can't do. So we get the bin model, and from my 3D model that I built into Blender, I gave that model to my friend Michael Sperandeo, and he basically built the airport space around it where it would be, because he knows video games, he knows Unreal Engine. I was trying to learn that, but it's a whole nother ball game. I was like, I just don't have time. So I gave it to him, and he basically built me a world where I'm able to place my artwork into that space. And he actually modeled me as well, and you can kind of see the model of me in the airport, and then my sort of 3D model that he plugged into it. So you're able to get like a good idea of what this will look like, you know, in certain different angles. So that's one thing I was really learning, is how do I sort of communicate that idea with individuals that, you know, may not know what's inside of my head. So not only did we build a 3D model of it, but I also wanted to communicate that idea through like real objects of what it would look like for me to collect a bunch of luggage and put it together in that shape, because the idea of the luggage in this sort of piece is talking about the endless journey that we have. So I wanted it to be all upcycled luggage, and then I wanted it to have this color scheme of sunrise and sunset, so everything would be colored, but I wanted to make sure that they understood what it would look like in real life. So I actually built a miniature maquette of the actual piece, and it's just like a small section where it would transition to sort of light orange color to a dark red color, and to show them exactly what it would look like to have a bunch of bags put together and have that color transition. So I slowly built this mock-up using bags that I got from Goodwill and other thrift stores, and basically made one that they can actually look at on video, because everything was going to be on Zoom. So you have to remember, this is 2021, 2022, when a lot of things was still sort of remote, and we had to do Zoom for everything, so none of this was in person. But the presentation went great, and I'll put a link to the video that I did where I shared the actual presentation that I did for the committee, so that you can see pretty much everything that I put together. And the actual presentation was 30 minutes. It was 15 minutes for presentation and 15 minutes for Q&A. And what was great is that I had Demerge and Mary Valdez along with me on the interview, so that when questions came up, especially the technical questions, that Joe was able to answer a lot of those technical questions for the committee, especially when they had questions about the suspension, the longevity of the bags, or making it fireproof, things like that. So that was great to have them there. So it was about probably 2 months before we actually knew about who won the actual commission. And once I was told that I won the commission, that's when a lot of things really just came into full gear in terms of, oh, now I have to be ready for a lot of, these other types of logistics. But the first thing that really popped up was making sure that the contracts were good. So I signed a contract with Mary, making sure that she was project manager on the project and would be able to manage a lot of the admin stuff and scheduling everything. And then I signed a contract with Demerge, making sure that they were a part of the project in terms of being there from the beginning to the actual end when they're installing everything. So they would be able to do everything, and we're trying to figure out the scope of work. So like everything that they were in charge of, what would I be in charge of? The things that I would be purchasing for the project, the thing that they would be purchasing for the project. So that was something that we had to sort of hash out. And then it came to the contract with the actual city. And when I got to the city contract, it's a lot of stuff to really look over, but a lot of the stuff is really just the scope of work and really just breaking down exactly your responsibilities and the different phases. So one of the main things about this contract, and just like this public art project, is that it's broken up into different phases. So when we look at the contract, you can kind of see that it has a scope of work, but it's broken down into these different phases. So like the phase of notice to proceed, basically once I sign a contract, that's like the notice to proceed to the next phase. And that's like one of the big hurdles of actually getting started, is when your name is on that dotted line or that straight line. It's like now you're responsible for this project going forward. So that's the notice to proceed phase. And all these different phases are broken up into milestones, so that you're getting a check at each of those milestones. So when you complete a phase, that is when you get a check. And this project was for $450,000. So it's not like you're getting $450,000 at the beginning, you're getting it broken up on these different phases. So that is something that you have to sort of work out when you're sort of planning the budget. So for this project right here, the notice to proceed, and then the next phase is the site and design research. So that phase is basically all about, now that you won the contract, you had your design, now it's like bringing the actual design team or your fabrication team, whoever you're going to team up with, to the actual site, so that they know more about the infrastructure of that area and what's going to happen. The next phase is the preliminary design phase. So now that you got awarded the project and you know more about the site and you did more research, now you have to refine your design. Now you actually have to figure out all the logistics, the specs, the tech, all that stuff. And when you submit your preliminary design based off of what you propose, that is when they can send it out to, let's say, the fire department, which they did for mine, and say, hey, is this something that would pass mustard in your eyes? And one thing that they came back to me in my preliminary design was, hey, we want to make sure that your sculpture is fire resistant, so that it doesn't add to, let's say, a fire if there is a fire. So on my preliminary design, I actually had to change it and add more flame retardant coating to my actual sculpture piece. That's something that I wasn't planning for, but that's what the preliminary design is for. You're having everyone look at your design, all the stakeholders at the place that you're going to install, and say, is this feasible? So after you get done with the preliminary design, all the feedback, you then go back to the drawing board and make sure that you refine it. So in that preliminary design, like I said, I added a flame retardant coating, and I took out lights that were supposed to be a part of my public art piece as well. So there were lights in between the sculpture that would give it like a back glow, but for me to actually accomplish that, it would cost more money. I'd have to have an electrical engineer. It would be a little bit more. So I took that out, especially because of the maintenance that was required, because they want to make sure that this lasts for a very long time. So for me, it was one of those things where I didn't have a good plan when it came to how do I sort of keep the lights on, literally keep the lights on this piece if they do go out. And if they do go out, what's a backup plan? So there wasn't really a good backup plan, so I had to actually cut that from the entire piece. So that's basically what the preliminary design phase does. And then you get into final design, making sure all the T's are crossed, the I's are dotted on your design, engineering, all those different specs, all that good stuff. And once you have that final design, you submit it, and if you pass, that is when you go into the installation and safety plan phase. And that phase is basically how are you going to get this piece into the airport and hung safely. What's the installation date, time frame, the safety plan in terms of how are you going to do it in a safe manner, all those different things. So this is why I relied on Demers to actually do a lot of that, because when you're dealing with a project site, it's really big and important, but when you're dealing with the airport, you know, especially if you have to go past the TSA checkpoint, then there's a lot of security involved as well. So having them involved in terms of coordinating everything and actually, you know, having worked with the airport before was a really big plus, because I didn't have to really think about a lot of that. I leaned on them for their expertise. So after that phase, you get into fabrication phase, which is where, you know, all the bolts and colors and fabrication and, you know, me getting a lot of the bags, putting it together, that's when that stuff begins. And that thing can last a very long time, or it can last a very short time. It just depends on scheduling of the actual fabricator, because we were in fabrication phase for almost a year, but the actual fabrication only took about, I'd say, 2 months, and then we were waiting until after the holidays to actually install everything. So it's one of those things where it's a lot of times it's about timing when it comes to that. But we were in fabrication phase, and then delivery installation phase is basically when you're finished fabricating, you're delivering your piece, you're transporting that piece to the actual location, and you're installing it. And that is something we'll talk about in the next video. And the final acceptance phase is basically once it's installed and the permits are closed and photographs are taken and it's there, you know, having the artist say this is final, this is done, and the airport saying we love it, this is done. That's when you can get that final completion and the final check. So those are some of the different phases that I have to go through, or I went through on this project right here. And this is what the contract is really talking about, those different phases and what happens. Some other things that the contract will talk about is like, you know, the copyrights, you know, what happens if, you know, things don't work out, the maintenance of this, who's responsible, ownership of the piece after a certain amount of time. You know, if things don't work out, if I die, you know, how do they complete the project, right? So that's something that you really have to think about. So a lot of this is basically just trying to cover people's butts, especially when it comes to insurance. That was a big part of this project, because if you go to the insurance part of this contract, a lot of times if you're working with the city, you will always have to have general liability insurance. So I have the basic general liability insurance that is required for me to work with the city. So there were other types of insurance that I did not have, that I had to rely on the fabricator's demurrage to have so that I can actually do this project. So like the business auto liability or commercial auto, the workers' compensation, property insurance because you're bringing property onto the airport premises, the professional liability insurance. That's something that I needed to have anyway. Unmanned aerial vehicles, so if you're using a drone, but I didn't use a drone, so they didn't really worry about this part of the insurance. And then the excess umbrella liability, that is something that Demurge had. So hopefully you get a gist of the contract. It has everything in there, even like this right here, which is basically a sort of plaque that I have to create for the end of the project. Some things you you don't realize at the beginning of the project, but you know, this is basically another $600 out the budget that you have to use for creating a plaque that you're responsible for as the artist. So this is something that, you know, I think a lot of artists can sort of glean from in terms of what's all involved when it comes to these larger public art projects and the things that you have to sort of run into and look at. This is a lot more complicated because it is an airport and because you're dealing with so many different entities and stakeholders, because people from the janitorial team to the fire department to security have an opportunity to weigh in on my sculpture and say, you can't have that in there, you can't have this in there, because they took out a pickaxe that I had in the actual sculpture. They took out ski poles that I included in the sculpture. The security did. Fire department said I had to have this in the sculpture, the flame retardant coating on there. The janitorial staff said I had to have, you know, a maintenance manual. So that's one of the things that you really realize, that when you're doing these larger public art projects and you sort of give it to the public, you also have to make sure that it's safe, it's something that can be maintained. And if you're sort of gone, because these pieces are supposed to last a very long time, how do they do the upkeep? How do they maintain it? How do they make sure that they know the colors? So like in the maintenance manual that I created, I basically had to have all the different colors broken down. I had to have a way of telling the individuals, this is what you need to do if X, Y, and Z happens. So that is something that you really want to emphasize and understand. This is something that is required for a lot of these different projects. One thing that you'll see in the link to the presentation is the budget that I created for this project. And the budget that I created for this project, you know, is something where you can see exactly what I was spending money on, but a lot of those budgets will change because it is a moving target. As you learn more, those budgets will always shift. But the main thing is that every time you shift those budgets, everything has to come in at $450,000 or below for this project. So that is something that I always had to make sure that no matter what I did, I can move money around, but everything had to come underneath or at $450,000. So hopefully this video gives you a little bit of insight on the beginnings of this project. So the next video, what I want to do is do more of the logistics, some of the fun stuff in terms of when I get into the actual fabrication phase and collecting luggage, collecting bags, and then basically, you know, the transportation, installation, and basically final shots of the piece. So showing you that stuff. So hopefully you like this video and you'll check out the next one, but definitely check out the link to the presentation that I did so that you're able to see even more behind the scenes of why I made some of the decisions that I made in this sculpture piece, so you get more understanding of some of that thought process behind the colors and shapes and things like that. So hopefully you'll be able to check that out. All right, peace.